Hey there, it's Paul here from Hopeful Consciousness. I hope you're good and had a good weekend. Wow, what an interesting experience we saw at the Oscars this weekend. I wanted to do a quick video to help understand the kind of emotions and what was actually going on. Some of you might be in a little bit of shock. I certainly was when I saw that happen. A lot of us look up to these movie stars as being basically role models, and when we see one effectively have a big emotional reaction like that, sometimes it can leave us almost questioning ourselves a little bit, because if that's what happens with someone I've modeled myself after or someone I've looked up to for years, what does that mean? So we're going to go through and try and look at the meaning. If you haven't already seen the clip, I really do suggest you have a look. But to sum it all up, basically you've got Chris Rock on stage as the presenter, and he's introducing all the people for the Academy, for the Oscars, and as part of that he made a joke about hair. And Jada, Will's wife, had had an experience with alopecia, and as a result of that was quite upset by the joke, and Will had a huge reaction, went up on stage and slapped him. Now, some people would say, well done, Will, for standing up for his wife. Other people would say that's shocking to just go and attack someone like that out the blue. So there's a lot of different possible judgments that can happen there. And then we'll look at the apology afterwards as well. So if you go back and look at the footage, you'll notice there's an interesting thing that happens here. So Chris makes the joke, and Will is actually starting out by doing the polite thing that everyone does at the Oscars, because they all know they're on public show. You can only imagine the kind of heightened emotions that are going on there, especially if that is, the pinnacle of Will's career. He's about to receive an Oscar, so everything is, really heightened. He's smiling and laughing along with the joke in the polite way you do, even though the joke's been made kind of at your family's expense. And then he looks over at his wife, Jada, and it's at this point that everything changes. Now let's go and have a look into Will's history a little bit. You can see this from some of Will's red table talks that he's had with her directly, and it's really, really interesting. He's talked about his father and how his father used to beat his mother, and he felt powerless to do anything about it at all. And you can just see this small child being there in a situation where his mum's being physically abused, powerless to stop his father because he didn't have the physical strength to do so. And he's kind of had to accept that part, or rather, I would imagine a lot of that shadow part has been tucked into a box somewhere and not looked at a huge amount. So as a result of that, as soon as Will saw his wife upset, it triggered a couple of things there. It's going to trigger his male kind of protector role, which is going to be enormously heightened by the fact he's gone through those experiences in the past where he's witnessed that kind of someone abusing someone else and getting away with it, and he was powerless to do anything about it. And this time, obviously, he has the power to go and do something, so he feels it necessary to do it. And I suspect there's also a little bit of him that's shameful about his own actions, because he was actually laughing away. And this will be a, in the moment kind of emotional feeling that just adds on to the other emotions, where he's feeling shameful at himself, I should imagine, because he was actually going along with that joke. He actually embodied for a second that role of his father, and that would have triggered a deep, deep rejection of that within himself, to the point that he actually had to get up on stage and say, I'm not accepting that, and slap Chris across the face. Now, of course, after that, you've got Chris trying to make light of a really heavy situation there. And then Will basically reacts again and says, don't go there. I'm putting a wall up around my wife. You do not mention her, and you cross that line again. So again, this protection is kicking in at a really deep, fundamental level, far stronger than any of the kind of social norms that would keep him in check at that point. It's kind of breached beyond that part, so to speak. So we've got to look at this with compassion, because this is Will's inner child effectively coming out and venting what is effectively a trigger by seeing his wife upset by someone else. Now, equally, you've got Chris in that situation, which must be pretty horrible to be effectively publicly shamed. And, you know, people are going to be questioning that joke for years and years. And I can imagine as a comedian in these days, you know, when everyone takes offense to almost everything, it can be pretty tricky to come up with comedy that's not going to be offensive. In fact, it's probably almost impossible. So there's a thing there, and I wouldn't be surprised if Chris might struggle a little bit emotionally to come to terms with this, and there might be a bit of a delay and a pause with him resuming comedy or getting back on the circuit, so to speak, as he deals with the emotions that this might have brought up. You know, if this was on a stage where he's in control at one of his gigs, it's a different matter. You know, there's security there and there's all kind of things in place, but this was a peer doing it in front of all of his other peers and basically slapping him. Can you imagine how you as a little boy would feel publicly on stage being slapped in front of everyone else and having to stand there and accept it because you yourself don't want to have that reaction? So credit to him that he had such a graceful reaction to not react back in a really horrendously negative way. So good credit to Chris Rock there for that. So we then go to the apology afterwards, where Will basically has had a chat with Denzel in the break, Denzel Washington, and Will makes reference to his wisdom and talks about, you know, the devil strikes at your highest moment. So in a way, it is an apology in a way, but at the same time, it's also a deflection. It's a deflection away from himself, that he wasn't himself, you know, evil took over. So there's not a complete and total ownership of that. So the only reason I talk about this is just so we can digest and see the emotions involved. Basically, there's a lot of inner child stuff that's kicked off here with this. There's been some very deep, heightened emotional triggers. And as a result of that, they've had this huge reaction. So we'll see in the next few days what happens about this. But if you have this kind of shadow self, all of us do ultimately have these things locked away in the cupboard that when we get triggered like this, we can have a big emotional response. And you can often look at people that might be stuck in prison, having completed a horrible crime that most of us would look at. And it's actually just a moment of control that they lost as one of these deep past memories was triggered, and they really struggled to cope with their response. So we have to look at both situations with love and compassion, I think, is the answer to this. Because if you look at Will's situation and have compassion and love towards that inner child that had to witness abuse, and then when he saw something like that starting to happen again, he decided to take action and almost letting that inner child out to have its rageful moment. And I should imagine at the time it probably felt good, and then a moment later there's probably instant regret at what's happened. And again, the same thing with Chris. You've got to meet that kind of, you know, there's going to be an embarrassed child there thinking he's done something deeply wrong with that joke and what happened as a result of it. So we've got to meet that with compassion and say, look, it was all in the spirit of things, everything's fine, and meet him with love and compassion. That, I think, is the main answer to this situation. We'll see what happens over the next coming weeks. But if you want to learn more about this kind of thing, this is what we do here at Hopeful Consciousness. We really delve into our emotions so we can actually become aware of these kind of triggers and reactions to really prevent what we've just seen happen there. So if that's something you're interested in, have a look at hopefulconsciousness.com and come and say hi to me, or drop me a message on Facebook and say hello. So I'll see you very soon.